You are squatting in the dirt at the edge of camp. It is dark. Your hands are gripping a root sunk into the ground, knuckles white. There is no doctor here. There is no hospital glow, no monitor counting your baby's heartbeat, no clean white sheet. Just firelight at your back, the smell of crushed leaves someone pressed into your palm, and the oldest pain your body has ever made. For roughly 300,000 years, this is how almost every human being arrived into the world. No exceptions for queens. No exceptions for the strongest hunter in camp. Every single person you have ever loved traces back through this exact moment, repeated generation after generation in the dirt. Today, in a wealthy country, you have something like a 99.9% chance of walking out of a delivery room alive. For most of human history, demographers studying pre-industrial birth and death records estimate something closer to 1 or 2 mothers out of every 100 died from the birth itself. Stretch that across a lifetime of multiple pregnancies. And most women in those records gave birth 5, 6, sometimes 10 times. And the odds stopped looking small. Giving birth was, for most of human history, one of the most dangerous things a person could survive, and most people survived it more than once. What actually killed her when it did? Not usually the pain itself. Hemorrhage, bleeding that would not stop. And infection in the days after delivery, when there was no way to keep a wound clean in a world without soap or antibiotics. A baby stuck in the wrong position could turn a normal labour into a fatal one within hours. There was no emergency exit. There was only the people in the room with you, and whatever they had learned from the births that came before yours. Why is human birth so uniquely brutal? Anthropologists Wenda Trevathan and Karen Rosenberg spent decades trying to answer exactly that, and they landed on something called the obstetrical dilemma. Walking upright on 2 legs, the way every human does, demands a narrow pelvis. Wide hips waste energy with every stride. But a big brain, the very thing that makes you human, demands a wide skull to fit through that same pelvis. Evolution split the difference in the cruelest way possible. Human babies are born early, brains still unfinished, soft-skulled and helpless, months before they could survive on their own. And even early, the fit is so tight that a human baby has to twist and rotate on the way out, turning its head one way and its shoulders another, threading itself through a birth canal shaped less like a tunnel and more like a bent pipe. No other ape does this. Chimpanzees give birth alone, often in a tree, and simply reach down and catch their own baby as it emerges facing them. A human baby, almost always, comes out facing away from its own mother, which means she cannot reach down and guide it the way a chimp can. Trevathan's research across dozens of cultures found something remarkable. Humans are nearly the only primate where the mother typically needs someone else's hands. Not because she is weak, because the geometry of her own body, twisted by walking upright and thinking with a huge brain, makes solo delivery dangerous. There is one striking exception that proves how serious that danger is. Anthropologist Marjorie Shostak lived among the hoansi, sometimes called the Kungsan, hunter-gatherers of the Kalahari Desert, and recorded their birth stories firsthand in her book Nisa. Some hoansi women chose to walk out from camp alone and give birth by themselves, a quiet point of pride, proof of toughness. But Shostak documented something else too. How often those same women or their neighbours ended up calling for help anyway when something went wrong, when a baby came feet first or a labour stalled for too long. Solo birth was the exception people bragged about, precisely because everyone understood how badly it could end. Archaeology backs this up in the bones themselves. In Ostuni, Italy, archaeologists uncovered the skeleton of a young woman, roughly 28,000 years old, buried with shell ornaments around her body. Inside her pelvis, they found the tiny bones of a full-term fetus. She died, almost certainly, in childbirth or very shortly after. One of the clearest physical snapshots we have of exactly what was killing women across the Paleolithic. Her community did not abandon her body. They dressed her in beads and laid her down with care, which tells you childbirth death was common enough to have its own rituals of grief, and tragic enough to still warrant them. So picture the actual scene. A woman in labour inside a shelter of bent branches and hide, firelight throwing shadows on the walls. She is not alone, and in almost every documented hunter-gatherer society, that is the point. An older woman, her mother, an aunt, a grandmother who has done this herself and watched others through it, kneels beside her, pressing on her lower back, murmuring instructions passed down with no books at all, just memory. Someone else holds water, or a bundle of leaves known to ease pain or stop bleeding, knowledge tested and retested over thousands of failed and successful births before her. If the baby is breech, feet first instead of head first, the older women already know which position to move her into, which way to turn her hips, because someone tried it on someone else's daughter decades ago, and it worked. Outside, the rest of the camp keeps the fire burning and keeps its voice low, listening for the cry that tells them whether to celebrate or to grieve. This was never a private, individual event. It was a tribe holding its breath together. Here is the twist that overturned decades of textbooks. The obstetrical dilemma, narrow hips versus big brains, was the accepted explanation for almost 40 years. Then, in 2012, biological anthropologist Holly Dunsworth published research arguing the real limit was never the width of the pelvis at all. Using metabolic data, Dunsworth showed that a pregnant woman's body can only generate so much extra energy before her own metabolism starts to break down, somewhere around the equivalent of running a marathon every single day for months. Babies are not born early because they would get physically stuck if they grew any bigger inside. They are born early because the mother's body simply runs out of energy budget to keep building one any further. The pelvis was never the trap. Her own metabolism was the clock. Either way, the result is the same. A human baby arrives helpless, and a human mother arrives in danger, and neither of them was ever built to handle that moment alone. Look at how birth happens around you today, and the pattern hasn't actually changed. It has just changed costumes. You call it a doula, a midwife, a labour nurse, a partner gripping your hand in a delivery room instead of a grandmother gripping it in a hut. Hospitals exist because the same ancient math is still running. Narrow pelvis or tight energy budget. Wide-skulled newborn. A process that still needs a second set of hands more often than almost any other mammal on Earth. The technology changed. The fundamental biological deal your body struck hundreds of thousands of years ago never did. What has changed, and not for the better, is how isolated that moment can feel. For most of human history, a birth happened surrounded by people who had personally been through it, who lived in the same shelter, who would be there again the next morning and the next year. Many new mothers today labour with a single partner in the room, far from their own mother, far from anyone who has personally walked through what they are walking through. Researchers studying postpartum mental health consistently point to exactly that lost piece: the disappearance of a built-in, lifelong circle of support. As one of the quiet reasons, new mothers report feeling more alone now than at almost any point in recorded history, even while surrounded by more medical technology than ever existed before. So the next time you picture yourself gripping something in the dark, in pain, certain you are facing it by yourself, remember the woman in Ostuni, buried in beads by people who stayed. Remember the grandmother's hands on a labouring back in a hut with no name. For nearly the entire history of your species, the most dangerous night of a human life was also, almost without exception, the one guaranteed not to be faced alone.